Okay, I think we can start.
Awesome. So thanks everyone who joined by now. As I said, I mean, I was wondering in the past few minutes what would be considered the number of participants in this webinar, whether it's the people who joined by now from the start, the people who signed up, the people who will get the follow-up email with the recording and would watch it. And I mean, it's always hard, it's always tricky to align on definitions, right? You can think about various ways of counting this, depending on what kind of trend you're looking to show. So with this way of thinking in mind, and we're going to spend the next hour together with me and Celia here. In the first 30 minutes, we're going to tell you about the journey that Bolt went through to build and maintain a consistent and aligned source of truth for their metrics with Databricks and dbt and Looker, and with the help of Euno's metadata-driven automations that were leveraged to execute this process. We will leave enough time for questions in the end, but as as we present and we go through the slides, there will be some technical parts. There might be things that will not be 100% clear. So feel free to type your questions and we will try to pick them as we go. Okay, let's get started. So, before we dive into what was built in Bolt and so on, we should start with the question, why we need to build and establish and maintain a governed source of truth in the first place. And I think the reality of large-scale data-driven organization is actually quite similar in the sense that you have more and more business teams that need access to data to explore, to analyze, to build data products. And the more reports, metrics, tables are created, you end up quite often with a complete chaos in your business logic, right? With a clutter of reports and metrics that's almost impossible to control. Serious trust issues with lots of inconsistencies and duplicates, which leads teams to spend more time disagreeing rather than deciding, like this example here in this slide, right? What was the average number of daily active users last quarter? Who knows? I mean, every domain thinks about a different number. And ultimately, this leads to costs that become higher and higher. Right, Celia?
Yes, and if the business teams struggle to understand the data teams behind those data assets struggle even more because we're the ones who need to keep up with the maintenance. The more things we have, the more we're going to fall behind. So, like naturally, the business changes. There are new things popping up, new features. So we have new data assets, but being able to control that in a meaningful way and to actually keep up with the business, that's the real point here. So if we fail to do that, that's really the root cause of those numbers not matching, because we can't keep up with the maintenance because we have those duplicates.
Now, you may ask, you may think, well, now we have AI, maybe our AI agents will save us. We will ask our agent what's the number of daily active users. But in fact, that's not going to work. And the reason it's not going to work is because, you cannot explain, if you cannot explain your data to people in the organization, and you cannot therefore explain your data to AI, AI will not understand your data. In other words, it will not be able to point to the right place in the data. And I heard it so many times in my interviews with data teams and with customers, it will return you hallucinating results. So AI is not going to save us. And and we will try to walk you through some approach that is built to save us in this case. My name is Sarah. I'm from Tel Aviv. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Euno, which is a metadata management platform that was built with this, specific goal in mind to help data teams and companies strike the balance between the freedom that business units need to access, to explore, to analyze data, and the governance of central definitions and data models. And our mission at Euno is to equip teams with the tools they need to deploy and scale reliable AI for analytics starting now. I've been working with Celia in the past year or so as Bolt became a customer of Euno, and I'll let Celia introduce herself.
Yes, hello, hello. So I'm a staff analytics engineer at Bolt. Bolt is a European super app that makes cities better for people by offering ride-hailing, delivery, and rental services. And my part in the company is to look at how we use our data in different teams and to make sure that our data usage is really smart and sustainable. We really aim to be one of those companies who knows how to to have a system of how we build up our data assets, and we really know like what the process is going to look like, so that we don't just make a mess out of it and create thousands of assets that we don't know why they exist and where they exist and who should be using them.
Now, in the past 2 years, for my role as CEO, I spoke with over 400 data leaders, people just like Celia here. And guess what? It seems like they all share the same vision of having one central place to manage business logic. I mean, no one wants business logic to be trapped in the BI layer anymore. And, with the emergence of dbt as the industry standard for data transformations, also the possibility to build metrics, this vision of having everything centralized in one place can actually become a reality, right? And dbt offers the technology to build and maintain data models and metrics right within a warehouse in a governed, in a consistent, version controlled way. It's aligned, it's consistent, it can be used and reused by various data users, different BI tools, different AI applications. But one thing, we have to remember, we have this technology, but business logic is created by the business. It's not created by, some back office of engineers. So business analysts and, data teams that work with the business, they need the freedom to create things as they go, using the tools that they master, quite often tools like Looker or Tableau, right? But at the same time, we want to give them this freedom, but we also want to be able to tell the difference between what's exploratory work, ad hoc analysis, testing, experiments, and our official definitions that we can actually rely on. And this official set of consistent definitions that we can rely on that actually reflect what matters is what we call the governed semantic model. It's a way to provide consistent data interpretation, to map the business intent to the right place in the data. Now, it's important for efficient BI. Everyone can agree, but it's critical for AI. It will just not work without it. So we want to make AI and self-serve analytics work at scale. So we need to establish a governed semantic model, one that accurately maps business intent to the right place in the data. But this process, is often perceived as a one-time thing. We will execute this one big migration project. We will build this metrics store, metrics layer, and then everything will just be consistent and work. But in fact, it's not a one-time thing. It's a continuous process. And let me try to walk you through those different steps here. So we begin by building it, right? We need to create the first set of governed metrics. It doesn't have to cover everything. We can start domain by domain, step by step. But then once our first set of metrics is defined, it can be just a dozen of metrics, okay? We need to have the tools and the processes to enable simple discovery and usage of those metrics. Users, analysts, business users, they need to easily find the metrics that they need that address their business questions. They need to be able to easily understand the calculation, figure out how to use these metrics in the reports and the dashboards and the data products that they build. And as our users will be developing reports and applications and get, new business questions, they will come up with new ideas. So this brings me to the third step here, evolve. They need to be able to keep contributing to the evolution of this business logic as they go, because things keep changing all the time. And finally, this brings me to the tools we need to govern, right? We're building those metrics for a reason. We want to make sure, they're actually used. People actually rely on this logic and not some, arbitrary things out there. So we need to know who is using them, by which data products, and how often. And when new terms are created elsewhere and gain traction, we need to be able to identify that and include them in this governed semantic model. So, and this is an ongoing process that is ongoing and in a continuous way. Now, there are different approaches to this goal of establishing and maintaining a governed semantic model. The common approach, which we're going to cover right now, is to select and code central metrics, build one source of truth for everyone to consistently use metrics. There are other approaches that heavily rely on metadata, and Euno is now enabling as part of the offering, which I'm going to briefly describe in the end. But we're going to dedicate the next part of this webinar to walk you through the process that was established and implemented at Bolt, how they systematically manage thousands of metrics. And obviously, beginning with step one, building, this step involves selecting the tools, the architectures, the standards for your metrics. And Celia is going to walk you through how they implemented this at Bolt. Now, it's going to be a bit technical. I'll let Celia walk you through all the details, but if something is unclear, if you want to clarify something or ask a question, this is a good section to type your question, and we will try to pull them as we go. So handing it to you, Celia.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Before we even go into the details of what we implemented, let's talk about the kind of requirements or goals that we had in mind that we were trying to solve for. And basically, we can say there's 4 of them. The first one is about consistency, because honestly, like data teams can keep metrics and definitions consistent up until the point they can't anymore. And that comes pretty quickly for bigger data teams. So the only really truly sustainable way to keep the consistency is to enforce the consistency with a tool. So we needed a tool that would make sure that the metric that we call revenue is really the same thing everywhere. The second point is about separation of concerns. We used to have a mix of defining and using the business logic in the same place, but now we want to split it up more. We want to make sure that there's one place where we define the business logic, and there's another, possibly multiple places where we actually use that business logic, and to really separate those two. The third point is about performance. We are a big business. We have millions, billions of orders happening, and we obviously can't just feed all of that into a BI tool and hope that the dashboards are going to be quick and perfect. So we do need to optimize for performance, and we do specific things, especially pre-aggregations, just for the sake of performance, not because that's the best or most convenient way to work with data. And the fourth one is about usage insights. We definitely need to know whether what we built has actually been useful. As Sarah said, like it has to be used by people, otherwise we're back to square one. So definitely the usage needs to be there. So the next part, I'll give you a little bit of a background on the tooling that is involved in this process that we have. So keeping the requirements in mind, like we have our Databricks setup. It's our main query engine. It does also serve to an extent as a catalog, but basically you can just see the table and column information that we have from there. Then we have dbt and Looker, and as tools, they don't need explaining to anyone on the call, I guess. But what is the interesting part here is how we use those two things together, because we are active users of the dbt metrics, but keep in mind we are on dbt core, so we are not using the semantic layer interfaces that dbt kind of provides on cloud, but we do make use of dbt metrics, and we've found like very, I would say maybe somewhat niche or specific ways to make use of metrics, but it really does help solve our problems. So I'll walk you through.
Maybe it's also worth mentioning, sorry, that they don't currently have an integration with Looker. So even if you were to work with dbt Cloud's semantic layer, you couldn't use it with Looker. So you're working with core, but you don't even have an alternative.
Yeah, so exactly. We need to kind of like dbt and Looker were there for us as tools, and in Looker we have literally 15,000 dashboards. So I can never come to work tomorrow and say, like, tomorrow we're not going to be using Looker anymore. Whatever we decide in terms of having a BI tool, currently it's Looker, and currently we need to make it work. So that's one of the reasons why we actually even went on this path. And then the fourth piece in the picture here is Euno, that helps us kind of bridge that gap between dbt and Looker, but it also acts as a kind of a discovery tool and data model viewing place for us. So these are the components, and now we'll go into way more detail of what do we do with those components. So let's start with the data modeling approach in general. Usually we have a fact table. On top of that fact table, we define our metrics. Let's say revenue or cost or whatever it is. It's probably a really big table, and there's a column on top of which you define a metric, maybe with a filter, maybe some other conditions. And it's not only one table, you can have multiple different fact tables containing definitions for different metrics. And at this point, metrics are just definitions. We haven't calculated anything yet. We're just defining how to calculate the metric. Now, the next step is creating saved queries. And saved query is a dbt concept for like a recipe of how to generate SQL code. And it's basically a set of metrics that you want to have and a set of group bys. So if you would write your SQL statement, you would do select something, 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 group by something. And it's the same concept. You're saying what do you want to group by, and you're saying which metrics do you want to see. And again, it's just a recipe. Nothing has been calculated yet. But then the next step is that we do actually materialize the calculation. So we generate different tables with different granularities where we expose those metric numbers in the data lake. And we make those data marts, we call them data marts. We make them automatically based on those saved queries. For us, they're just dbt models that are based on our metric definitions and our saved queries. There's some automation, how we turn them into dbt models, and how we then make sure that the lineage doesn't get broken. Yeah, and also the important part here is that the data marts, they can have different granularities. And if you think about this, quite often we kind of mix the granularity and the metric. We want to say things like revenue for users, and then we want to define revenue for drivers. But actually, conceptually, we just have revenue as a metric, and then we can calculate that for users or for drivers or for markets or for customer segments. So the point here is that we define the metric only once, but we reuse it in different data marts. And with this these metric definitions, we ensure the consistency between those data marts. And now the next step is that we also want to make those things available on the Looker side, right? And the first thing that we do is that we take the metric definitions on top of those original fact tables, and we make views out of those fact tables, and the metrics become measures on Looker side. We have the views, and then we have also explorers. So for every table that we had in dbt, we have a view and we have an explorer, which really means that the data has been exposed to Looker users. And these explorers are the ones that enable the most detailed analysis for any kind of like ad hoc or corner case use cases. But what we don't stop there, we also sync the, we also make the data marts available from Looker. So now for all of these different granularities where we have pre-calculated the values of those metrics, we also make those available from Looker. And the same principle, the metrics become measures. So you can, in case they're additive, you can aggregate them further on the Looker side. And now you can choose between those different explorers. Some are more granular, some are less granular. And
maybe
this is where the
no,
automation is really important, because we use Euno to create those views. So these views and explorers are fully automatically created. And it's not only that we create them, but we also maintain them automatically. So whatever change we make on the dbt side, that will always pop up on the Looker side, really making sure that things in the data lake are consistent with things in the BI tool.
Maybe one quick comment here, just to say a few words about how Euno works. We're actually monitoring every new build of DBT, and when things change on the DBT side, we see a new metric or a new metadata piece that indicates, I mean, this column is a measure, this column is a dimension or a new metric. We are automatically generating the LookML PRs to either update those views with new measures or generate new views or generate new explores. So this is completely automated. And, you know, eventually or ultimately, you can think about it like the team can only focus on writing the DBT part, and the LookML part is automated and consistent, and things are immediately available in Looker, including the documentation of DBT and so on. And you can build it this way. You can just think metrics. You can just use transformation and just think models. I mean, it really depends on your architecture, and each case is different. And we're also able to use Euno to automate the generation of pre-aggregates of those smarts if you want. And there are various ways to build an architecture and use those automations. But the bottom line is consistency and saving, you know, the grunt work, the duplicate work on the engineering side.
Yeah, and we bring all the details along. So whatever you have defined for a metric, that includes even like, well, documentation, of course, descriptions, but it also includes things like formatting and labeling and things like that. We can define them once per metric and make sure that for every explore where we expose that metric, the labeling and the grouping and everything and the formatting and the value formats in Looker and everything will be the same. And well, Looker isn't really the only place that we use our data from. We do need the data for other purposes as well, and we need this data to be accessible from the data lake. Although actually, if we think about it, Looker does understand, Looker as a company does understand the need to use your data model outside of Looker. So they do actually provide you with a way to define all of your business logic in LookML and then access that business logic via their APIs. So in theory, you could do that. But for a big enough company, it really stops making sense to put everything in Looker and then access everything through Looker. So that's why we really need our data also from our data lake. Specific examples include experimentation, ad hoc analysis, machine learning, feature stores, things like that. And we really, again, want this to be consistent with what we presented in the BI layer. So that's like really one of the big reasons why we want to have those definitions moved from the BI layer to the data lake, or like, let's say, more independent semantic layer. And also there are literally technical things that help us maintain our business logic. Then you can't have duplication in metric naming if you have all the metrics defined in the same place. And it really enforces you to define everything in black and white. You can't cheat a system.
Now, before we move on, if there are any questions on this part of the, you know, the architecture, the design, we invite you to type them, and we'll move on. But I mean, don't hesitate, and we'll go back because this was a lot in just a few minutes. Moving on to, you know, with, you know, we have this solid foundation now in place, even, you know, just a few dozens of metrics. I mean, today we have thousands, but you can start with just a few dozens. The next step is to think about how users can actually access them. And, you know, in our case, we need to find, I mean, we build metrics in DBT, we expose them in Looker. So how we help users find the DBT metrics that they need and easily understand from which Looker Explorer they should use them, right? That's the challenge.
Yes, and really the first thing to do when addressing that challenge is not a technical thing. What we did was a lot of training and discussing, actually, because as data teams, we are so used to working with tables and columns that we sometimes forget that the business terms are actually metrics and dimensions and entities. So we just went through a cycle of going back to the basics of how a business works, that we actually define our revenue, we define our cost, we define our profit, we define our profitability, we define efficiency. And then we want to see that from different angles. And also the other thing is that we have a lot of tables in our data lake, but a table is not the same as another table as another table. Like we discussed before, we have different types of tables, and we had to really go back to like, okay, we need to start defining dimension tables, we need to start defining fact tables, and then we need to start defining aggregation or data mart tables on top of those. And each of these has a different purpose. And when you're starting to use our data, make sure you know which kind of table you need to start from and which kind of table is the best for your use case. And yeah, of course, the inevitable question does come up. Okay, so which one is the best one for me to use? So the first thing we did, as we've been talking about, we made sure that all of the tables that come from dbt are, well, not all of them. I mean, intermediate models are still hidden, but all of the exposed models that we create in dbt, that includes all the dimension, fact, and mart tables, that they're available from Looker, and we use the automatic sync for that. But then it doesn't immediately answer the question of how we should consume all of that from Looker. And I've given this quite a lot of thought in terms of how to use Looker. And I think there are two distinct use cases for BI tool usage. The first one would be when you're a person or your question is about, well, when you're a person that is responsible of a dimension. And a good example here is a regional manager, or maybe you're responsible of some specific customer segment like business users. You will want to know everything, like all the metrics that are available for you about your dimension, or like sliced by your dimension, let's say. So if you're a regional manager, you can look at the cost, revenue, profit, whatever other metrics you have about your business, and you want to know that region by region. And then you might want to deep dive into this, looking at country by country. And this kind of experience is very easy to provide in Looker. It's basically an explore experience. You choose your metrics, you slice by something, and then you keep playing around with that. But there's also another use case. I think there's a distinct way that you analyze your business. Let's say you're a product manager, and in Bolt, you might be responsible for a metric like driver online time. And now the way you would work with that metric might be very different. You might look at the relation of that metric to other metrics, and how these other metrics drive up or down your metric, and how to impact that metric. So you're looking for the biggest driver, or like the biggest, one of the metrics that impacts your metric, but is the easiest to actually influence in the real life with actual projects. So yes, you might be slicing that by something, again, by city or region or whatever, that helps you understand how to drive those metrics up or down, but you might also be very much interested in how those metrics relate to each other. And this kind of like metrics first thinking is not very easy to do in Looker, because Looker thinks very much explores first. Like you can't, Looker doesn't have a metrics glossary. Sarah, I can switch to the next slide. Because in Looker, when you start looking for data, you have to find and explore. That's the starting point for you. But our business thinking sometimes can be very much more like metrics first. And the dbt metrics approach is also very metrics first. Like you have a glossary of metrics, and then you can choose from those, and then you can evaluate those metrics for specific entities. So it's a little bit difficult to translate the dbt thinking, the metrics first thinking, into Looker. But the way we think we can help it, even though Looker doesn't natively support this kind of thinking easily, we can help it out with a business, with a glossary. So the way we think is it could work is that you have a business question. Then you go into a glossary to find whether there are metrics defined that would help you answer that business question. If you find those metrics, then you can immediately see which explorers are available that already have that metric for you. So where you can see the values of that metric. And then you go into that Explore and you use that Explore. The good thing is here is that if you can find and explore that will give you an answer, you don't need to create a new one. Because often what happens is that there is great content available, but you can't find it, so you create your own. And that's where all the duplication problems start, actually.
Right.
And yeah, having that searchable metrics catalog helps us really follow that path of how users think about metrics. And also, again, like if you can search for it, you can see where it has been exposed. So there's a few screenshots, like you can actually see like the list of metrics, how much they're being used, where they have been exposed. So you can immediately go through that path. And again, if you can find it, you don't create a new one.
Cool. So now going back to the process, from before, I mean, as analysts use these metrics, they might encounter a new business question that doesn't have a predefined metric. So they cannot find something in the glossary that addresses their needs. Now we need to offer them the opportunity to evolve business logic, right? And in other words, I mean, the business is constantly changing. We have to be able to evolve our metrics as we go. Now, no analyst in the world will be waiting days or weeks for their new concept or idea to be modeled by some engineer or analytics engineer in the data layer. I mean, and actually it would probably also be a waste of time of those engineers, because it might take like 2, 3, 4, 5 iterations until those analysts even come up with the right definition. So analysts need the freedom to explore, to try things, to do their ad hoc stuff, to evolve business logic within their tools as they go. And in Bolt's case, this means they need the freedom to do their experiments in Looker, right?
Yes, and when we started getting into the phase where we actually did have those metrics defined, we ran into some interesting questions that hadn't come up before. And the first one was about the definitions. So we had this example where we defined a really complicated profitability metric, and it has a lot of revenue components, it has a lot of cost components. And we started looking at the definition and thinking, oh, like, should it be defined like this? Why is this component here? Or should we add another component? So like actually having this black and white and really like distinct definition on the metric opened up those conversations. And then the next phase we realized is that, oh, but like, okay, we think we should add a new component, but who has a final say whether we should add a new component or not? This specific metric is a really interesting one. The whole company is using it. The whole company is talking about it all the time. All of our all hands presentations always have that metric in them. Yet no one was really able to say what the definition was or who's the owner of the definition. So again, like we had to go back to reviewing the whole company is using it, but actually should this team or that team be responsible of it? Who has the final say in this is the definition? So we found that team. That's great. And then we realized, okay, there's also like the whole process around this. Like that team is responsible, sure, but how do they let other teams know that they're going to be doing an update or they're going to be keeping up with the business change? I don't know. Let's say we add a new business line. Of course, it has to be included in the revenue and cost components, and we know it has to be included. So now there's a process of who has to be notified, how do we regenerate our data assets, and so on. And there's another really good part, a good thing about our current design with the metric definitions and the marts. We have split the business ownership and the technical ownership. So the business owner, the analytics team, can update the metric definitions as they go, and then they can hand over the technical work of creating those data marts and making sure those are available in Looker and they're always up to date to the more technical engineering teams. So overall, we're able to iterate faster because each team is doing what they're best in. Business team is defining things, and the engineering team is making sure that we can quickly iterate and update our data assets. And another question that immediately came up is that, okay, if we move all of our logic into the dbt or like the data lake layer, aren't we now locking our Looker users completely out of any chance to model data or to try anything out? And we did really want to address that issue. So we came up with an answer. No, we're not locking them out. We are providing them with a specific pattern of how they can work with our core data model and core business logic. So the way this works is that we define our core models, we define our metrics, we expose them in Looker. But in Looker, we also create these extra artifacts where we expect Looker developers to contribute. And because they have this special place where they can contribute, they can build on top of the core data rather than next to the core data starting from scratch, because that's what used to happen a lot before. That because there wasn't something available, you had to create a whole new pipeline to have that something available. But now we're really providing a place where you can add on top. And in Looker terms, that's refinements. Sarah, you can click on the next slide. It's a very detailed part of like which pieces go where. But the point, my main point here is that when we create those views in Looker, we also automatically create refinement files. And the refinement file is where you can add business logic or you can override the core model business logic. And the same for explorers, you can refine them further. And we've created specific places where we tell people, here's where you can refine. And also, when those refinements become widely used, let's say there's a new measure or there's some kind of an update, then the data team can easily pick up on it and add it to the core model because it's already based on the same structure, and it's very easy to pick up on that logic and put it where it kind of like belongs in the core model part because it's not built separately.
So, and you know, Celia, one thing we always like to say, well, I mean, you build these metrics and everything looks so neat, but in fact, I mean, there is like a clutter and a chaos behind it that it's worth mentioning, right? This legacy logic. So you said 15,000 dashboards. So maybe you want to say a few words about that.
Yeah, we actually initially had this dream that we can easily pick up our business logic from Looker and move that to our core model using some automations, maybe even. And honestly, we started looking at that, and the way we had built that up was not really easily transferable to the core logic. We just had to build the core logic from basic, like from first principles, like what are the entities, what are the metrics, and so on. And now, of course, we have kind of two worlds. We have whatever we used to have, and we have the core models, and we have to unify, we have to do some rewiring. There's a lot of cleanup work to be done, which is where this usage information comes in really handy.
Yeah. Yeah, so something that can help with this already existing clutter that Celia just described, this legacy logic, is the ability to track how this business logic is used. So we have tons of, you know, lookable measures, central data teams. If we give them the visibility into everything that was going on the business side, everything that analysts create, and they can see who is using what and how much, you know, who are the owners, if they can find the conflicts, all the similar measures that were created in these duplicated pipelines, but there's one that is used, that there are 20 other copies that are unused. This level of visibility can really help them understand what matters, what eventually needs to find its way to this new semantic layer that they're building. So the evolution doesn't only depend on analysts opening tickets for data engineering. The data team has visibility into what they do, what they create, whether in refinements or what they used to create in lookable views and explorers. And based on this visibility and usage intelligence, they can keep evolving the semantic layer to reflect, you know, the current state of the business. So this is just to highlight the importance of usage metrics, which ultimately, you know, naturally brings us to the fourth element, which is governance. How do we make sure this source of truth that we've just built is being, you know, is actually used by our organization for reporting?
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah,
Like, we build our like the whole process of how we maintain our data is built with this governance in mind. We know that we want to be monitoring what's going on, and we want to make sure that our high quality stuff that we built really does get used. Otherwise, like time lost and no benefit.
Yeah, and you know, Bolt have now they've established a semantic layer. They started using Euno as their, metrics catalog to discover, to trace metrics in Looker, to trace usage. And now me and Celia are trying to figure out, how we can monitor the actual usage of these governed metrics, and that actually the whole point that reports will be aligned and consistent is actually achieved. So the process of governing metrics is, it consists of two basic elements. You can use Euno's tagging automation. We have some sort of like custom properties. You can think about it as automated labels, and you can label your dashboards or your data assets. And make sure, you can tell the difference between things that rely upstream on those governed metrics and mods, and things that do not, that they rely on some other logic in Looker or in Databricks or whatever. And this helps data teams, but also AI agents, and we'll get to that, tell the difference between what's official and governed and what's exploratory. So this is why we call certifying data assets. And the second element is actually tracking the actual usage of these metrics. You start by creating them. No one's using them, but you can see, how the traction goes up with time. And here are two nice examples for that. So one here is the breakdown of the top used dashboards of the organization. And a certified dashboard is considered one that only queries dbt marts and models, not using other logic. So if there's a certified dashboard, and it's highly used, that's cool. But if suddenly a highly used dashboard become non-certified, you get an visibility into that. You can even get a notification to the owners of this dashboard. Listen, something changed. You might not be able to rely on the data that this dashboard reports. And a second example would be this kind of metric scorecard, where the data team can track, which users, which data products use this metric in the past month, in the past quarter, and so on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And to summarize that, it really is that cycle. The process and the tooling isn't perfect yet, but personally, I really believe that it solves a really big problem that we've had in data teams. So I'm willing to take some inconvenience, and I'm willing to work on improving this process and the system. And I know that in some ways we're creating new processes, we're creating new tools even involving in the process. So we're creating an extra barrier for people to contribute to our data model. But then we don't always have to look at that as a negative thing, because if we provide some framework and rules and guidelines on how to actually contribute to our data model, it might make it much easier to contribute, because you don't have to figure everything out from scratch. You don't have to start from scratch all the time, but you have a specific place where where you can go, where you can add your logic, and that there's a process around this that will take care of everything else. And yeah, it definitely doesn't have to cover 100% of your business, but we are aiming to cover the core, really the main things that most of the company uses. So we have these business reviews. Anything that goes into a business review on a management level surely should be a governed metric or governed thing. So we aim to cover that part, and we always want to leave a sandbox for new things, for things that are not central.
Thank you. And maybe a few more conclusion words. There's one thing, one takeaway I would want our listeners to take from here. We're not living in kind of a dichotomic world. It's not freedom and wild, wild west. Do whatever you want, or governance. It's both of them. It's always both of them. And technology can help you build, governed foundations in this kind of constantly evolving space. Which brings us to our last slide here with a glance to the near future. We mentioned AI just a few times, so we're dedicating this slide to say a few words about AI at Bolt and AI in general. Yeah, Celia.
Yeah, we have been in one way, we have been a little bit blocked into our current data platform architecture. We've had Databricks, but we've also had Presto as a query engine behind Looker. So there's been a bit of complication between different SQL dialects and making sure that the data is accessible from two places and so on. And now we're simplifying our architecture. So that's one part of it. but also we're preparing our business logic, and we're preparing in a kind of a portable way, because we've just come back from the Databricks Data and AI Summit. They've introduced a lot of nice stuff around Databricks dashboards, asking questions on top of your dashboards, asking about predictions, doing deep dive analysis, deep research, preparing this like Databricks one view where you can just go in and enter a question. And all of that like includes a lot of effort behind the scenes to make sure that your business logic is there, that it's consistent, that you can trust it. And then you open up all of this space of, okay, maybe we can try this now, because whatever comes out, we can possibly trust. Of course, we want to try it first, but we're only getting there to see that, okay, is this for us yet, or do we need to prepare more?
And to summarize, I mean, maybe something else about AI and beyond the scope of just Bolt. I mean, Bolt built a very strong foundation to start with, which really paves the way for them to start exploring with Genie and with the, Databricks dashboards and so on. But maybe the main message to take from here is get started now. I mean, there is no reason to wait. It's true for metrics alignment and, you know, a governance framework. It's also true about AI deployment. Or, you know, I mentioned in the beginning, curating, selecting metrics, building a semantic layer is one way to approach it. It's a huge step forward. It's a very powerful way to approach it. But at Euno, we're able to capture your entire business logic from the data to the BI layer, semantics, lineage, enriched with usage, with ownership context, with custom properties that help you determine whether these assets, these dashboards, reports meet your standards or not. And we are able to surface this context in real time to AI agents. This really is the task, right? We need to help them understand the data. So a semantic layer, as I said, is a big step forward. And you can use Euno, as you know, we showed here, to help you establish and build it and use it and evolve it. But it's even possible to start with just the beginning, the early steps of this, and saving this upfront, you know, huge upfront effort if you can leverage your existing metadata in a smart way. So the sooner you start, the sooner you understand, you know, how far you are from making it work, and probably the sooner or the faster you beat your competition. So 2 words, start now. And this brings us to a few in our last 10 minutes. If anyone has any questions, you're open to share them with us right now. I can, I mean, well, if someone wants to type something, I'll start with a question we get quite often. I'll introduce it to Celia. Like, what's, you know, we've shown all that. It's so much work and such a nice foundation, and we can work. I mean, we're vendors. We work to develop tools that empower teams like Celia's team. But in the end, you need to convince analysts to actually use that. They need to get a value for that. I mean, how do you engage analysts to actually use these metrics and not keep doing what they're used to?
Well, it really is about feeling the pain and feeling the benefit. There's definitely, for some analysts who are actually maintaining this data model, the semantic model, it might even look a bit more painful than previously. But then there's a bigger group of very thankful data analysts, data users, who are very, like, really, they benefit a lot from us being able to sort that out. So it's just a matter of feeling the benefit, and then you want to get more of it. And yeah, there's also this like maybe unmeasurable benefit of, if you keep many more things up to date and in sync, you cut out maintenance time, you cut out time to find answers to your questions. And that actually brings this like opportunity cost topic. Like, if you lose a lot of time there, you're going to be doing, I don't know, half the analysis you could be doing, meaning you're creating half the business value, or half the actual value for the business. So it's kind of like hidden, difficult to measure, but I believe it's there.
Thanks. And I think if we are looking, I mean, the whole premise of AI, there's no reason to do AI for the sake of AI. The reason we do AI is to actually give a real self-serve experience for business users to explore the data and get reliable results. this would definitely accelerate things and accelerate the delivery of, of data-driven decisions. So that's also maybe another way to encourage and to motivate. If we don't build this foundation and start using them and start relying on them, we will never have the true self-serve experience. So I know it's hard to engage people that are busy sending the report on time, but probably that's the high level strategic motivation here. We don't have further questions, so we want to thank everyone who joined. We'll send you the recording after the session ends, and thanks for joining. We appreciate that. Thank you, Celia. It's been great. Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.